Okay, so we are now recording. Welcome everyone to session P, called Collaborating Across Libraries to Advance Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Social Justice, a profile of the CSCU Library Consortium's EDI and SJ team. And today we have representatives of several institutions from the Library Consortium of the Connecticut State Colleges and Universities system. Today we have Patrick Carr, the program manager for the Library Consortium operations. We have Veronica Kenausis, the Associate Dean of Library Services and Academic Success Programs at Western Connecticut State University. And we have Miguel Garcia, the Reference and Instruction Librarian at Gateway Community College. I welcome this panel who have worked together in an admirable and no doubt arduous, complex collaboration to put together these efforts and to cover many, many students across the state and to tell us how they did it. So now I leave it to the team.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for that introduction. And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Patrick Carr, and as was just noted, I'm program manager for CSCU Library Consortium operations. So in this role, which I've held since 2019, I work in the Connecticut State Colleges and Universities System Office in the area of academic and student affairs. And I'm joined by Veronica Kenausis from Western Connecticut State University, Miguel Garcia from Gateway Community College. So beyond the positional responsibilities that Miguel and Veronica hold, they are co-chairs of the CSU Library Consortium's Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Social Justice team. And in this presentation, the three of us will discuss this team and the work that we've done. And it has indeed been arduous, and looking forward to discussing it. So next slide, please. Before diving into the work of our Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Social Justice team, you need to understand a little bit about the context for the team and the work that it has done and continues to do. So, as I noted a moment ago, I work in the Connecticut State Colleges and Universities system, which from this point on, I'll refer to by the acronym of the CSCU system. So this system enrolls approximately 85,000 students in certificate and degree programs. You can see our locations in this slide. The system includes the Connecticut's 4 state universities. So those are Central, Eastern, Southern, and Western Connecticut State University, as well as Charter Oak State College. That's a small online-only college, and the Connecticut's 12 community colleges, which are in the process of consolidating into Connecticut State Community College. Next slide, please. The CSCU Library Consortium includes all of the libraries in all of the institutions of the CSCU system, plus the Connecticut State Library. The consortium's mission is to empower library collaboration in support of success, equity, diversity, social justice, and access to resources that spark creativity and intellectual enrichment. Next slide. In alignment with that mission, the consortium has a strategic framework that identifies 4 core strategic directions that guide our work. And those 4 directions are breaking down barriers, partnering for success, coordinating collections, empowering discovery, and advocacy through assessment. Those strategic directions are described in a bit more detail on the consortium's website. And in a few minutes, if you're interested, I'll put a link in chat where you can learn more about the consortium and its strategic framework. Next slide, please. The consortium carries out various projects and initiatives that are in alignment with those 4 strategic directions that I just highlighted. The work is overseen by the consortium's Council of Library Directors, which includes all of the directors of all the consortium member libraries, plus my position. Under the auspices of the Council of Library Directors, the consortium contains various teams, which they're kind of like standing working groups, and they consist of and are led by people who work across the consortium member libraries. Next slide. The newest of these teams and the primary subject of this presentation is the consortium's Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Social Justice team, which we oftentimes refer to as the EDI and SJ team. This team was established in 2021, and it originated from the suggestions of a librarian who works at Housatonic Community College, who advocated that we need to really make sure that we're walking the talk when it comes to EDI work, and that there should be a consortium-based team reflecting the leadership roles that the CSCU libraries play on their campuses when it comes to advancing positive changes. Next slide.
I'm going to unmute myself. Yeah, so I want to just reflect a moment on what Patrick was saying about the suggestion from one of our librarians. It came from a place of right after, in the summer of 2020, when everything was coming to a head. And we have libraries in general, and our consortium have always talked a lot about equity and inclusion. But the suggestion really was to put our money where our mouth is, to walk the talk, and that we had teams focused on all of these functional areas, but we were all struggling individually as institutions to kind of find our way through EDI initiatives. And so just like all of the other teams that exist in the consortium, this team was conceived to give support and guidance to individual institutions and to the consortium as a whole. The founding chairs, the Council of Library Directors formed the charge, formed the committee, and the founding chairs were Dr. Clara Agba from Southern Connecticut State University and Joe Riley from Tunxis Community College. And they really shaped the direction and the power and the ongoing commitment that this team holds still today. Once the team was formed, the charge was, and this is what we do with all of our teams as well across the consortium, we put out a call for participation. Who would like to be part of this? And we added this new team, and so we were really unsure, or the Council of Library Directors was very unsure about what the response was going to be, but the response turned out to be really quite amazing. There were many people across the consortium who were interested in being a part of this. And also let me be clear that when we put out a call for participation, it goes through all members of the library community. So it's not necessarily, it's not restricted to library directors or library managers or librarians. It could be library staff members, it could be part-time, could be full-time. And then the Council of Library Directors will kind of sift through the list of people. In this particular case, we took almost everybody who was interested in being a part of this team, since we understood the scope of what we were trying to do. But what that meant was it was a very big team to start with. And as you all, I'm sure, have experienced, doing anything in such a huge team was going to be quite challenging. So Clara and Joe immediately decided that it was best to form task forces that kind of operated individually and then would come back together. So on the screen in front of you, what you see are the task forces, minus that last draft meeting notes. This is just a screenshot of how we do our communication, which is in a platform called Basecamp. So these 7 task forces were established: resources, readings, events, and workshops, CSCU, EDISJ LibGuide, a microaggressions repair team, a library policies review team, a collection analysis and review team, recruitment and retention, and assessment. I will just say again, pause again, that the whole conversation was about the policy of, well, the whole team came about. The question that was asked by the librarian at Housatonic was, should we be charging fines to our students now that we understand it to be an equity issue? Should we be still interrupting students' progress to degree and their transcripts because they owe the library money, or doing holds or blocking them from taking out other resources if they've lost something or missing something, things that were very traditional to our library operations. If somebody was a bad actor or exhibited bad behavior, we just said, you can't do it anymore. But we understood that now to be more of an equity issue than we had ever understood before. So that was the genesis of the whole team being formed. And then these seven task forces within that big team were really about focusing on the things that we all thought were important for us to address in our individual libraries and across the organization. And I have to say that this is, and I've said this in other, once the task forces were formed by Clara and Joe, people were asked to self-select into one of or two of these task forces. Some of us misunderstood the call and got initially on all of the task forces, which is obviously not sustainable. So it all got straightened out. Everybody kind of filtered into a task force that they felt that they were comfortable working in. I have to say, and I've said this in other places too, that this has been one of the most rewarding team organization committee experiences that I've had. From the very beginning. Each of these task forces just kind of took ownership of the area and dove right into the work. They elected or selected people to lead each task force. They set their own, we all set our own meeting times and meeting agendas, and then the large team would come back together when Clara and Joe felt it was appropriate, and we would just kind of go through each team and what each team was working on to make sure that the communication was flowing. Again, we use Basecamp, all of us use Basecamp as a communication platform, so we were able to see what the other teams were doing, but it was nice to have that conversation. And it was during this initial time period where the committee as a whole clarified that our collective goal was to provide guidance, not necessarily to mandate things that each library should do, but to say, we all struggle with how we get started in this kind of work. Here is an example of how you can do it in your organization. So one of the first things that the library policies review came up with was a best practice around a holds policy and a fines policy. And it was up to the individual institution to implement as they saw fit, but we provided those best practices. And the guiding principle has always been to support doing equity work, no matter where the organization or the individual is beginning, because we all know these journeys are different from everybody. But also, this gave us an opportunity to see where, going back to the slide that Patrick shared earlier about the different teams that already exist, where there was some overlap and where there were collaboration opportunities with other standing consortium teams. We had to recognize quickly that this is not standalone work, right? This work is woven into all of the other work that we do. So you don't do EDISJ work here and then information literacy work here. It all has to be woven together. So so we needed to take a moment to look at where those collaboration and that overlap happened. And all that being said, it was an incredibly productive first year for a new committee. So can we move to the next slide? I just want to talk about a few of the accomplishments that the different groups achieved during that first year. So the first thing was that we came up with with some best practices for fines, fees, and holds. they're, again, to varying degrees, but I'll give my institution as an example. Esther as an example. We're still struggling a little bit with the fines, holds, and fees. We're fine free. That was not a problem, but we still struggle with, well, what to do if a piece of material of a book or something goes missing. What do we do? How do we try and get that material back? Obviously, that's what libraries want, their material back, but what is our hook? How do we get people to respond to that? So we still struggle with it, although we are trying to implement those best practices. One of the achievements that has gotten, I guess, a good amount of press, especially with Rai Couturier, who is the system provost, is the anti-racism resource guide that was produced by the LibGuides task force. So this was produced in recognition of every single institution was working on an anti-racism LibGuide. So again, this gave us an opportunity to use our collective power to vet, to create, to edit a anti-racism resources LibGuide that can be shared across all of the institutions. Again, not mandating. If your institution had your own, you could use it, but this one came out so well that we, most of us, I believe, have linked to it in favor of maintaining our own. So we don't have to duplicate that work on our campuses, and because it reflects a lot of the organizations, what we care most about. Yes, go back to the slide for a second. So the recruitment and retention task force that Miguel and I chaired, were responsible for another proposal that we are still working on today, but we are interested. We have written a proposal to become part of the ACRL Diversity Alliance proposal. We did a lot of research with the recruitment and retention task force when we were looking at our community, our library staff community. We reflect the institution. We reflect the national organization, the national status of the industry or the field, which is overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly female. And so the ACRL Diversity Alliance, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is an organization or a program through which you can join the Diversity Alliance and you offer a residency to a new career librarian from an underrepresented community. Our proposal to join this alliance instead proposed 3 residencies, concurrent residencies that would be placed in different areas around the state in our institutions. It would be a 3-year residency, and each resident would have the opportunity to work in a community college, the opportunity to work in a state university, and then the 3rd year would be of their choice. I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole because we could talk about this proposal all day, right, Miguel? Yeah. We are currently seeking funding. Our initial proposal was to the system office. We felt strongly, or at least I felt very strongly, that it should be supported by the system office instead of by grant money, but we are still working on it. The new recruitment and retention task force is working on finding some grant funding to get us started. In a different area completely, we supported and worked with one of the other consortium teams to transform some subject headings that have been identified as offensive. The most important one, or the one that we started with, was the term illegal aliens, which has been proposed to be changed in Congress, but has not been approved. But in working with the consortium's cataloging team, we were able to transform that subject heading so it actually reflects our reality. And then we did a staff survey kind of that fed into the Diversity Alliance proposal, we're still digging through some of the results of that to find out how people feel about their work environments here in the CSCU. And lastly, again, not the last thing that happened, but we did provide a collection development diversity statement, which institutions could append to their collection development policies or prepend to their collection development policies to make it explicit what we value in terms of collections and different collecting in different areas. So that was all done in the first year. Everybody was kind of exhausted. So as a transition, and on the next slide, there are a couple of big things that happened. The committee went through some big changes. Dr. Agba, who had to go on medical leave and then subsequently retired from Southern, I, on an interim basis, was tapped to replace her as co-chair with Joe Riley. And then Joe had to step down from the committee as well to pursue other professional commitments. And then so Miguel was then tapped to be co-chair. So we took over the chair responsibilities, and it was clear to us that people were exhausted. It was continuing to be exhausting work. This work itself, plus the system was, and Western in particular, were going through some financial challenges. There were a lot of things going on. So it was clear to us that we had to streamline a little bit and we had to rein in a little bit. We couldn't continue at the pace that we were running at. So let me also be clear, though, even though Miguel and I took over the co-chair responsibilities, that a shout out to Patrick. We could not do any of this without Patrick. And this is true across the whole consortium. His work is crucial to the functioning of the consortium and any team that we work in. So we streamlined as much as we could. We went from 7 task forces to 3. We put out a new call for participation. We had fewer people, which, we understood because people worked really hard during that first year. But we decided that the most we could collapse some task forces into other task forces. So we ended up with just 3 task forces. Recruitment and retention we thought needed to be a standalone and still needs to be a standalone. We collapsed a few other of the others into operations and collections. So to look at policies and collections and other collection related activities, and training and communication. So they will be the ones that keep the LibGuide going. And they always actually published a couple of really important newsletters about what the team was doing. I want to be clear that this is a very internally focused team. So we don't do much outside of the consortium. We don't provide these services. It's just to provide space for the consortium members themselves to have discussion, to learn, and to grow. Those are. Once we got down to 3 of these teams, we also encouraged, Miguel and I also encouraged to just concentrate on 1 or 2, possibly 3 initiatives during this year. And now Miguel.
Great. So thanks, Veronica. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of the task forces and what we sort of focused on, starting with recruitment and retention. And, I have to say our big thing really has been this Diversity Alliance proposal. It's sort of the great white whale, so to speak, for us. But we're really committed to this. And just to recap what Veronica mentioned, the idea was to, because we had 4 regional state universities, was to pair each regional state university with a community college, but in the area. Because one of the things we thought about was location. It's expensive to live in Connecticut. If anybody attended the Simmons presentation this morning, that was one of the things they talked about, was relocation costs and things like that, and stipends and all that. So These are, to be clear, these residencies are full-time positions. These are librarians. These are not, this is not meant for graduate students. This is not an internship. This is, but it is not, and this was what we were very, very clear on this. For us, it was important that this be in addition to the regular staffing of the library. And that was key, because what we didn't want was the position to be slotted in as some, as one of the regular positions. And then after 3 years, the person leaves, because then it sort of defeats the whole tenure track process, right? So we want this to be in addition, but as we know, one of the issues in the profession is the entry-level positions require 1 to 3 years of experience. So the idea was, how can we get these folks coming from historically underrepresented groups, right? How can we get experience, meaningful experience, where they can then go use it and say, I have 3 years of experience. I worked at a community college. I worked at a CSCU, right, at a 4-year institution, and I worked at 2 years of one of them. And we wanted to build in that choice because we wanted to see, what do you prefer? Now, one of the things that's interesting about the Diversity Alliance, and one of the things we talked about, this model would be completely unique. This has never been done. The idea of pairing a university with a community college is not done. And when you look at the member participating schools in the Diversity Alliance, they are tier 1 R1 institutions, most typically, right? And for those of us who are particularly at the community college level, we think it's a very important experience for folks, because people once they come to community college, and they tend to be very committed to that level, right? And so we wanted to offer that opportunity. So the idea of making this pairing where somebody could move to Connecticut for 3 years and we know about public transportation in Connecticut, right? But we be able to stay in one place for 3 years, get one apartment, and be able to go both to the CSU and to the CC. So that all of those things factored into the process. So again, as Veronica mentioned, our stumbling block has been funding. Everybody loves the idea. It's wonderful, yay, rah, as I've been saying lately, rainbows and unicorns for all, right? But it's funding, right? Because we're talking about above and beyond the existing structure. We have pushed very hard in terms of trying to get system funding for this, and so far that has not come to fruition. So we are starting to look at alternative sources, and one of the things we're taking a look at is doing a Laura Bush, an IMLS grant, and other funding sources. But that's our primary focus right now, because it seems like there's a natural dovetail there, and we're hoping that even if we don't get 4, if we get 1, if we get 2, I mean that's better than nothing. And just the thinking is for the team, I think if we can get 1, even if we can just get 1, then that makes it a reality. And now it moves from creating it to sustaining it. And that's a different sell. So that's sort of where we are with that Diversity Alliance proposal. In year 1, we did a staff survey, which really delved into perceptions, thoughts, opinions, etc., around DEI issues from across. Again, we're talking about 16 physical institutions and 1 online institution, so 17 institutions feedback, and taking a look at that. And because we made the conscious decision to focus and limit our focus to certain things, one of the things we put on the back burner a little bit was delving into this. So one of our, as you'll see on a later slide, one of the things we want to take a look at is it's time to get back to that data now, right? We've gotten to where we need to be in terms of Diversity Alliance, we've tweaked and all that. So we want to do a deeper dive to that staff survey, because there's data there that we need to figure out what can we do with this information, because it's important information, we can do things with it. 2 of the other things we're talking about, the first one is development of student pathways into the library profession. So we know that we all have student workers, and they're integral to the success of the library. And we also know that a number of our student workers do come from historically underrepresented groups. And so it's not an earth-shattering notion to think about the idea that, is it possible that some of our students are enjoying their experiences enough to possibly consider it as a career opportunity? And so, and if so, how can we encourage that? How can we create or develop a pathway for them? And it raises a couple of issues because you're talking about bachelor's pathways, right, for entry level into that library associate, library assistant type of position, or are we talking about the bachelor's then graduate pathway where you're talking about potentially an internship in a library and subsequently employment as a librarian? So that's one of the things we're taking a look at, but we're ultimately here for the students. So is there a way that we can take at the students who are already working for us, who know what we do, who know what libraries are, who have some semblance of what librarianship is? It's not wearing a cardigan, glasses, and shushing people, right? It's a lot more than that. So, that's one thing we're taking a look at. We want to explore a little bit. And then the second piece of it is, as we know, librarianship is not just about librarians, it's about library personnel. And the reality is that our success is a shared success, right? Without non-librarian library staff, the whole thing would fold. They're absolutely integral and key to the success of libraries. We also know that credentialing is always an issue in the profession. And so the question becomes, is there a way, and this opens up a whole series of layers in terms of credentialing, in terms of barriers to entry into the profession, et cetera. Is there a way to transition people from, and I'll use the phrase, I don't like it because I don't think it's fair, but non-professional library positions to professional library positions, which they're all professional library positions, let me make that clear. But is there a way to make that transition? How can we create that? So we want to take a look at sort of basically two different levels. We want to take a look at our student staff, right? And possibly students in general, but really taking a look at our student staff because they're already familiar. And we want to take a look at our non-librarian library staff. And are there opportunities to transition them into better, higher paying jobs, more responsibility, and things that in many cases, folks may already be doing. But because of a credential, they may not be being recognized for it in terms of compensation. So those are a couple of things that we want to take a look at in terms of recruitment and retention. In terms of operations and collections, this is again something that is we're hearing a lot about, I think, on a national basis, is taking a look at how can we do a diversity audit of collections. And thinking about collections, not just in terms of what we have, but in terms of what we're acquiring, right? And quite frankly, in terms of what we're deselecting, what do we need to keep, right? It's all of those different aspects and taking a look at it through a lens that that always existed, but may not have been as important or as prevalent as it is now, as we now realize as needs to be, right? So taking a look at a diversity audit.
This rotundity line may have the circumference of a Ferris wheel, but that doesn't stop him.
I wanted to circle back to something Veronica mentioned, which is to say that none of this is prescriptive. This is all recommendations. We're trying to develop, get into the research, come up with ideas, policies, practices, et cetera, that we can then recommend to our member institutions and they can adapt or mold as they see fit, okay? So for a diversity audit, different folks may want to do it in different ways, but we can at least come up with some recommendations how to do that. And this is where we can see some of those cross team connections, right? Where we're working with our assessment team, right? In the task force, right? In a similar vein, trying to develop, we've seen it on a nationwide basis, book challenges and what's happening with book challenges. We're reading headlines on an almost daily basis these days about book challenges and what's happening in different policies and legislation at the state level or at the district level or municipal level, et cetera, and what's happening with that. So trying to be proactive. Should this happen in Connecticut? Should it happen? When it happens, however you want to phrase it, do we have procedures on or recommendations for procedures on how to handle that? We thought that was very important to do that. So operations questions, we're working on that. And then the last thing that operations collections worked on this year was the submission of a grant application to PEG-PISA for the system-wide purchase of diversity e-resources. And I'm going to turn it back over to Patrick, who's going to talk about what happened with that last bullet.
Thanks, Miguel. Of course, it's only during the presentation that I realized there's another slide we should have included, or another point that we should have hit on. So I'll just note that, and then I'll talk about the grant. The EDI and SJ team, as has been discussed, is led by and consists of staff that work across the consortium member libraries. But another important part of our work has been interns. We've had 2 interns this fall who were students in Southern's Master in Library and Information Science program, Julie Marinelli during year 1 and Marie Nania from year 2. And so that's really been another nice kind of dimension of the team's work, as has been to engage library school students in the roles that libraries play in advancing equity, diversity, inclusion, and social justice in their communities. So I just wanted to note that. So the grant. So I'm sorry for that little tangent. So the CSCU system was recently awarded a $91,000 grant in funds for the purchase of permanent system-wide online access to library e-resources. So this could be books, it could be streaming video, articles, digital archival materials. But these resources need to address equity, diversity, and inclusion across academic disciplines. The funds were received through the PEG-PETIA grant program, as I believe how the acronym is pronounced. This is something that is overseen by the state of Connecticut's Public Utilities Regulatory Authority. So it's the Public Educational and Governmental Programming Education Technology Investment Account Grant Program. So PEG-PETIA. But one of the areas of awarding grants, it focuses on library e-resource collections and collections that are acquired across libraries. So this was a great opportunity for the EDI and SJ team to work together to develop a proposal for the types of collections I was describing. So now that the grant funds have been awarded, the EDI and SJ team are going to be working to make selection decisions. So the selected e-resources will be curated for currency, quality, and diversity of authorship and perspective. And so that work is going to begin fairly soon this summer of considering options. And I believe we have until October of this year to acquire the materials, which would be permanently accessible across all of the CSCU libraries.
All right, thanks, Patrick. I do want to say, earlier I mentioned how we couldn't do this work without Patrick. My part in writing that grant was, this looks good, Patrick. That's basically what I did. Most of us did, like, oh, Patrick, great job. So I want to just give him another shout out for writing a successful grant, pretty much single-handedly. So the last task force is the Training and Communications Task Force of the 3 that in the streamlined team. And really this task force is responsible for seeking and sharing information on professional development opportunities. Again, we don't, everybody's journey is different. Every individual's experience is different. And so we're really focusing on learning and dissemination of knowledge so that people can pick up what they need to pick up when they need to pick it up. And we've done 2 major things this year that I'm going to speak about. The first one is we sponsored a consortium-wide book discussion, and the title of the book we used was Broke: The Racial Consequences of Underfunding Public Higher Education, which was extremely timely given the CSCU current financial situation. And the team also, with the extreme amazing work of Tabby Heavner, really, produces a periodic bulletin with definitions, resources, discussion topics. So let me talk a little bit about the book discussions. Miguel, if you could go to the next slide. So this book was a book that we had acquired through one of our relationships. Was this one of the ones that came through the UConn?
Yeah, this was purchased collaboratively with UConn, where we had a shared pool of funding, and then we leveraged our collective power to expand our access to ebooks.
So the book is actually about experiences that the author had in the University of California system, but really the experiences were very familiar to us. And so we had two sets of sessions, one that covered chapters 4 and 5 about austerity and responses to austerity, and then 6 and 7 about how how those institutions, and I say we because it again was very reminiscent or echoed what we were experiencing on our campuses, about how underrepresented communities, we make them do additional work to be recognized and supported in the way they need to be supported. This is our first venture into sponsoring book talks. It was relatively successful. We will try and do a better job of getting more people to attend, I think, the next time we do it, and we may consider expanding to outside the library consortium. I'm not sure about that part yet, but it's going to culminate. We have again, thank you to Patrick. Every winter and every summer, we have a consortium-wide retreat. And in this particular summer retreat, Patrick has engaged the author of the book, Laura Hamilton, to come and give us a presentation on sort of next steps. What do you do after you have experienced, or while you're experiencing a financial crisis that maybe leaves you without the resources that you need to serve your communities, especially your minoritized communities. So that will be happening on June 30th. And additionally, we are going to be engaging a librarian from the University of California system to speak specifically to impact on libraries. So this has been a really rewarding experience. And again, we hope to choose another work and repeat this in the not too distant future. And then the next slide will show you the bulletins. And this bulletin has done two things, in my opinion, has done two things. One, it gives people an opportunity to kind of reflect on their own. So this bulletin is now produced twice a semester. Once a semester. Yeah, once a semester, again, in recognition that producing something like this is a lot of work. It's a heavy lift. So we did not want to overburden all of our team members and task force members who are doing full-time jobs, and this sort of on top of it. But the bulletin is produced and sent out to all member institutions via Basecamp. And it really focuses on definitions, on learning opportunities, and we try and time it with where we are in the semester. So the most recent one, we knew we were rolling into summer. So it focused on professional development opportunities for people to do throughout the summer, whether it's readings or articles or webinars, workshops, whatever it was. So this also gave us an opportunity to highlight the work that was going on in this team and other teams that was associated with EDISJ work. So it's been a really great opportunity for us to get the information out, but it also serves as sort of a good map of where we've been. The first several were produced during that first year, and you could see how it's grown and changed along with the team and the task force structures. So it's a really great record of the work that's been done.
So sort of where do we go from here as we enter year 3? I mean, it's sort of interesting to sit here and listen to this for myself, just to realize what's happened in only 2 years. I think it's great. It's important work, and you know, I'm proud to be a part of it. So these are, and this is by no means you know, limited to these, but these are some of the key focal points. So, you know, obviously you can tell that the Diversity Alliance residency proposal is really one of our big pieces, and we want to continue to try to do that and get the funding for that. I just realized we left a bullet off here in terms of taking a look at the survey. We really want to get back to that staff survey because we have this pool of data from our people, right? We need to take a look at what do, because there's knowledge there. And, what are we missing? What are we missing? What don't we know? We don't know what we don't know, right? So we need to go find out what we don't know. We talked a little bit about, I talked about the student pathways and the staff pathways. And I think our intention is probably to start initially with a greater focus on the student pathway. And sort of not ignore the staff pathway, but sort of that student pathway. Is there something there that we can create and continue to work with our library staff to try to transition into library roles as well. We talked about the collection audits. That's going to be ongoing work. That is not only is it not quick, it needs to be done well, and it needs to be ongoing because it has a ripple effect. The results therefore impact collection development, therefore impact collection maintenance, etc. We want to, the book discussions were really quite interesting and had spawned some really good conversations between folks, which is what book talks are supposed to do, right? And that was great. So we want to continue that. Again, it's not on here, but the bulletin, we want to continue that because that's part of how we disseminate the work of EDISJ to the broader library community. And we want to make sure that people don't think it just went away. So the bulletin will continue. And then, finally are there additional collaborations in terms of supporting this work? There are a lot of academic libraries, as are represented here today. Are there opportunities to pair with some of the private institutions, to possibly pair with the University of Connecticut, to pair with other places in furtherance of this work that will be, most importantly, mutually beneficial to the institutions, right? And I think that that's key and ultimately most beneficial to our students. So that's sort of some of the things that we're going to take a look at focusing on in year 3. And that is our contact information, and we're happy to take questions.
I'll note that I just put 2 links into chat. One of them is to the CSCU Library Consortium Strategic Framework. So that's kind of our guiding document for the informs the work we do. And then also, I believe Veronica talked a little bit about our anti-racism resources guide. So I put a link in there as well.